Welcome, Jen and Tim, to the Leaders Who Care series. It's about time you got here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
There's a lot to talk about, and as usual, like what we usually say in LA is you leave them wanting more, so then we can do a sequel later, right? So we'll see how we do here. But it's great to have you on here, and I'd love if you could briefly introduce yourself. The key here is I always have to tell people, don't tell the whole story of everything now, because then I'll have nothing else to talk about at the end of the day. Just say a little bit about who each of you are, individually as a couple, where you're from, maybe something you've never told anybody else you want to reveal now. That'd be pretty cool. Then we'll get into the business and philanthropy stuff. How's that?
Sure, of great. Course, yeah. Go ahead, Tim.
No, you start.
Well, I was born in New York City and raised in Northern California, right next to Stanford University. I have been an entrepreneur since I was 9. And there is a bit of a story there, but officially became an entrepreneur after graduating from college, first the University of Colorado and then Simmons, now Simmons University in Boston, where I focused on business management. And had the privilege of meeting Tim when he was at business school at MIT. And then started on my entrepreneurial journey first in Boston.
We'll get to that.
Minneapolis and then California. We've been in California for 30 years, have 2 beautiful children, and now we're really embarking on the pivoting from being entrepreneur and philanthropist and investor to social entrepreneur. We say soulful, building a soulful network of social impact leaders.
Super cool. Tim?
Yeah, I grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. I was one of 6 kids. I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and spent, well, you can't help but spend time in nature when you grow up on a farm. But I love fishing and just being in the outdoors in general. And I played, a lot of different sports depending on the season, but I was best at football. I ended up getting recruited by a bunch of different colleges and universities and ended up choosing Dartmouth, in large part because, I knew the academics would be good, but also wanted a more rural environment. And so that worked out really well for me. And after I studied a field within engineering. I think as a kid growing up in the Midwest, I was fascinated by thunderstorms and weather just in general. And when I went to college, I wanted to be a meteorologist, but then I realized that Dartmouth didn't have a major in meteorology, so I had to find something else. But I ended up landing on a field called system dynamics, which is this, learning to mathematically model systems. And it was ironic because I think literally the first system that I modeled was glucose regulation in the body. And ironically, it turns out that both of our kids who are now adults were diagnosed with diabetes at the age of 4. So I had some insight into diabetes even, back then. But then also another system that we understood, and this was back in the early 80s, was they called it global warming at the time, now climate change. But the systems thinking has really shaped, the way that I think about the world, the way that I see the world, and we can talk more about that. But we, after graduating from Dartmouth, I worked as an engineer for a couple of years, but then decided really my heart was I was more on the business side of things. So I went to business school at MIT Sloan School, where
I've heard of them.
Yeah, where System Dynamics was founded. So I was able to kind of continue to my study of system dynamics, but more and more applied it to business. So I got into technology, from that. So yeah.
No, that's awesome. So you like cheese, I gather.
I didn't have a acquired taste for cheese until I became an adult. I don't know why, but as a kid, I loved milk, but I never, cheese never caught my fancy. So
well, I guess if you have so much of it around, maybe it does go in the direction. Yeah. I'm not sure. So are you Packers fan?
Well, of course, yes. Yeah, you can't help it.
Which, of course, has forced me into being a fan.
It's like asking a Quebecer if you're a Canadians fan, right? So,
That's 100% true. We were born with skates on. It's really hard on our moms. And so we just hit it. So you kind of have touched a little bit on what I wanted to know. Like, as a kid or teenagers, were you doing science projects? Were you playing sports? Were you into music or video? Were you into volunteering? What type of stuff did you each do?
Well, Ed, I mentioned, I started on as an entrepreneur very early on. My folks had a little guest cottage behind their main house, and I would put on puppet shows for the neighborhood kids. The puppet shows were free, and then I would make ice cream sundaes, and I would charge. So that was my first entrepreneurial venture. My dad was a stockbroker initially, and then created an investment management firm at 3000 Sand Hill Road. For anybody who's in the investment world knows that it's the hub of venture capital. And we would do very interesting entrepreneurial ventures as kids of making wreaths. And my brother ended up having a Simonizing car business. I ran a catering business in high school, and then I worked as a camp counselor in college in Yosemite. That was quite profound for me. Yeah, so a beautiful childhood. I think one of the most impactful aspects of my childhood, however, was the fact that my mom put my dad through Stanford Business School working at the Bechtel International Center. And so I grew up in hospitality and grew up as a member of the homestay family for 50 years. My folks brought in one student each year from around the world, where we took them under our wings for that entire year. And so I've had this great privilege of appreciating diversity in the world. And I think that has really just colored my perspective of the impact that we can have, that we really need, and all of us need to be on board to solve some of the world's greatest challenges. And so blessed to have a Chinese brother, two French brothers, people from all over the world that have been significant in my upbringing and my perspective.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome, because I played a lot of hockey, coached, my kids did too, and we always would have hockey teams that were visiting or coming to us, staying with us, living with us, and
Neat. Oh, I love it. So you get it.
Yeah, totally. It's the way to go. And in Montreal, we never talked about having diversity. We just did, basically.
Yeah.
So what about you, Tim? Obviously sports.
Yeah, sports was a big thing for me. I think that this is a little bit crazy, but I had, when I was, 12 or 13 years old, I had a near-death experience where, growing up in the country, you had to kind of invent things to do. And we had a big rainstorm one day, and the water was coming off the hill, and it created these rapids. So we decided we'll go take the inner tubes and kind of play in the rapids that was created. And I was the youngest, but I didn't get an inner tube, so I was just swimming around. I got sucked into a culvert, and I didn't want to let go because I knew there was a barbed wire fence on the other side. And so I was just being pulled. My head was being pulled underwater, and I didn't want to let go because I thought I would get shredded by this fence. But long story short, my brother knocked my hands off. I went and hit the fence. He pulled me out and gave me mouth to mouth and saved me. But I think that near-death experience, when, and I don't want to make light of this, but I literally had the experience that I was floating to the light. And I think having that experience at such a young age kind of taught me that, okay, death is not that bad, because once I kind of reached that point, I just kind of let go and I was floating to the light. And I think that has allowed me to kind of, for me, it was a big thing to go to Dartmouth because my whole family had gone to the University of Wisconsin. I didn't know anybody that, maybe there were one or two kids who'd gone to the University of Minnesota, but that was about it. And to just say, okay, I don't want to live my life with regrets. And, so I was willing, I think, to take what seemed like big chances and do things that were maybe not the norm as a result of that experience.
And I think the other thing you've taught me along the way is the journey is the reward. Mm-hmm. And that has been profound for us as a couple, as a family, and as business partners. Every step of the way, that is the reward rather than what we're trying to achieve ultimately. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. What an early age to have to go through that. And yet, if you're going to learn that story, that's a great time to learn it really early.
Right.
Your life. So does your brother hold you to the fact that he saved your life the whole time?
Well, I don't know if you have brothers, but I had two older brothers and one younger brother, and there was a lot of let's call it brotherly love growing up.
No, I get it. I've got a younger brother. It always pissed me off that he was taller and I was into sports and he wasn't. But other than that, he's still a good guy. You talk about journey. Kobe Bryant used to say, "We're all going for the dream. What we don't realize is this is the dream."
Wow.
Practicing and thinking that's the journey. And he said, we're all waiting that the dream comes, then we're all happy and everything. But this is the time we should be happy during the dream. And
it's interesting. I grew up with this sort of attitude of, I was going to write a book someday called The Lemonade Queen. It's all the diversity or the challenges that I have faced of, I went through premature ovarian failure when I was 21, didn't know it until I was 23. But I thought for 10 years I would never be a mother. And yet I'm, of two miracle babies, built a company that, I never imagined that I would build a company where I would raise $30 million in venture money to grow it, and then saw my company taken from me. Just the hardships that have come throughout life. And it was really a woman from MIT that we know, Jenny Kemedy, who pivoted my perspective from that notion of, Jennifer, what if you don't have to make lemons anymore in order to make lemonade? And that has been such a wake up call for me as this woman of resiliency, that we're now, to your point, we're what we described for the people we serve here at the retreat, our home in San Francisco, we're striving to get them on a magic carpet ride. And that the notion of that is just so much more appealing than let's take the lemons and constantly be making lemonade.
No, I love that. I'm surprised you went to lemonade and not the ice cream from the initial thing. But then maybe you have the ice cream and then the lemonade or something like that. But it's a great.
My cousin actually took my grandmother's lemon sherbet business and turned it into Gaga's. Originally, it was called Lemon Sherbetter. We were investors in that. We need to revive that someday. That will be.
Right, I'm in. We can go with that.
It is the best. Oh my gosh.
So talking about journeys, you both mentioned your education and the schools and whatnot, and your school of hard knocks that you went to.
Yeah.
And obviously, Tim, you went from the engineering and science to major companies like Sun Microsystems and Apple. For each of you, what were your motivations at the time? I mean, you had said, Tim, about being a meteorologist. But when you were going to school then, what were your motivations at that time? And then after that, tell me how you guys met, in the sense, you said you met at MIT, but to become co-founders.
Sure. Yeah. I think I came from a very kind of practical background. I wanted to understand, to study engineering because I thought, okay, I'll get a good job. And it turned out to be true. But I think, more deep down, I always had this fascination about, okay, how do things work? And I loved, well, it's interesting. We ended up sitting on our flight from Boston to San Francisco last night, sitting next to another Dartmouth grad. And one of the things I loved about Dartmouth was, in addition to the engineering classes that I really enjoyed, I also had exposure to government classes and philosophy classes, and that was super helpful, in my business career to have that background. And I think just in terms of motivations that, I love technology. I love the feeling of really being on the cutting edge of things. I kind of beat myself up for a while that I was born late for the PC revolution, not knowing that the internet revolution was coming. And then, just this morning I was reading about, Microsoft and ChatGPT and artificial intelligence and the new search engine.
Right.
And it just feels like, another big thing is coming. We're not sure quite what it is yet, but it feels like it's coming. So it's always fun for me to be, on that cutting edge and doing new and different things. So how about you, Jen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, feel so blessed to be a pioneer, to have created one of the very first companies on the internet. We were 50,000 websites in the world when we launched biospace.com, the leading portal for the biotech and pharmaceutical industry. And it was really just born out of that effort to create something that didn't exist that was needed in the marketplace. The biotech industry was a hard one for investors and the media to understand, and the internet was a perfect solution to help educate investors and the media. And so I'm always searching for that opportunity to bring something to the market that doesn't exist that the market needs and will make the world a better place. And that's what we're doing now with our home in San Francisco in Maine, and with our rebuilding of what we're calling the RE Soulful Network of Social Impact Leaders.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get to that. So were you a couple before you became co-founders, or were you co-founders and then a couple?
Well, I was the founder of Biospace, and I recruited Tim.
In more ways than one, apparently.
Yeah, it was neat for, because he had been, as he mentioned, he was out of business school. He worked for Cree Research, a supercomputer company, and then he became the Mac guru there, and then really wanted to step into being a product manager in the Macintosh space. And then was inspired to get into the field of system dynamics, where he ran his own consulting business, Indigo Systems. So while he was serving companies like Apple and PG&E, I was building Biospace. And then it was March 15th, 1995, when we went to Boston, or as we call Genetown, and we, in front of about 300 biotech CEOs, we launched biospace.com. And Tim saw the reaction, and he said, you are onto something special. And at that point in time, I started the business in 1984, started to morph it into an internet company at December 1993. And then March 15th, 1995, launched the company. And that's when we started to grow the company together to over 100 employees, and off to the races we went.
So it was more than "do you come here often" type of line.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we met, Jennifer and I met at a luau party at MIT.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I was rowing crew, so I said, I gotta go. We gotta be up at 5 o'clock in the morning. He was really questionable whether or not, I was really interested.
Well, but when we met, it was interesting because, she asked me all the standard questions, like, okay, where did you go to school as undergrad? And I said, well, I went to Dartmouth, and not knowing if she would, know about Dartmouth. And she goes, oh my gosh, my dad went to Dartmouth.
My grandpa and my dad went to Dartmouth.
To tell the truth, you actually researched that before.
Right, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And then she said, well, where did you grow up? And I said, I grew up in Wisconsin. And she goes, oh, no way. My mom is from Madison. So
I played football, and my brother played football. There was just all these beautiful correlations. So it was, almost love at first sight.
For me, it was, yes.
Things do happen for a reason. And, it's interesting about the internet. I remember now have my own executive search business. And I remember clients saying, this internet thing and websites on the internet, we're just doing fine. I don't know what that's about. We don't need it. And I said, really? Not and none of us really knew how big it was going to go anyway, but we knew there was something there. But it was interesting how, people will be afraid of change. There's no doubt about it. And they said, we're doing fine. We don't need to do that. So I wanted to move on a little bit here to, we founded Fifth Element on the basis that leaders in businesses will do much better when they're doing good. And it's finally caught up to that. And that's where I trademarked the term leaders who care, because those are the ones that really do care about doing good, and they understand it's better. So now can you share with us the vision, mission of Rugged Elegance, when the idea came to both of you, how it came about to both of you, and obviously why it's important?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can, I'll start off and then let Jennifer chime in. But basically we invest in people from historically marginalized groups. So it's BIPOC, LGBTQ+, women, and we've also added veterans and formerly incarcerated folks. And the real motivation more than anything else was this idea that talent is evenly distributed in the world, but opportunity is not. And I would also add that capital is not. And I think that speaking as a straight white male, that people tend to invest capital in people that look like them, talk like them, run in the same social circles. So unfortunately, the net impact of that is that people in historically marginalized groups lack capital. And when we think about capital, we think about it in a larger context. It's not just financial capital or intellectual capital. There's also political capital, there's social capital, we call it soulful capital. So there are many different forms of capital, but the thing we recognized was that that two things needed to happen working with historically marginalized people. One was to get them here to what we call the Retreat SF, for what we call a Day to Breathe, which is a curated experiences that gets people kind of in touch with their with their purpose in life, and then get them aligned with key stakeholders, and then start the conversation about access to capital. And then the second part of what we're doing is, and Jennifer referred to it, we call it the Rugged Elegance Soulful Network, but it's really a community based on this idea of reciprocity, that that the leaders that we serve at the retreat automatically become part of our network, and then we help to catalyze access to capital by connecting them together with each other. And then we also connect them to our larger network. And Jennifer, you want to?
Well, our ultimate goal is each of the leaders who are invited for a Day to Breathe, our goal is to help them 10x the impact that they're having in this world. And so that impact is not going to be driven exclusively by me or by Tim or Dr. Amy Coget, our co-host. It is that network effect by connecting them to the other leaders who have had a privilege of coming in for a Day to Breathe, bringing them together. Too often we as impact leaders are living in our own silos. Right. And it becomes way harder than it really needs to be. And I use the term lemonade, and so I'll use it in this context. But yesterday we fly in from Maine back to San Francisco. We get to our rental car, and oh my gosh, my license is in the jacket pocket here in San Francisco from our Pelican Bay Supermax prison trip that we had just a few weeks ago. Left it behind. Tim's, we can't find his driver's license, so we can't rent our car. So we've got to Uber our way here. I have an event last night. Now I understand why our car rental didn't come about, because this man from Uganda who wants to create a technical school in Uganda, he met me, he heard about my passion, about our focus, and it was the most glorious gift to be able to say, I have 3 people I cannot wait to introduce you to, as a result of one by one. I mean, the Retreat SF was born one of the silver linings of COVID. We had been hosting soul salons and workshops around peace, around climate change, about health and well-being, around racial equity, around gender equity, These are all sustainable development goals that we're focused on. Of the 17, we're focused on 5. And so we had been hosting or using our home in this capacity, but really with COVID, we were forced to serve 1 leader a day, and thus the day to breathe concept was born. But now we go back to that network effect. Now we've served almost 200 leaders, and the network effect that can occur that can help this man from Uganda get there further faster, because Mwangi Mukami, who's building a school in Kenya, I get to bring them together. And the power of that is powerful. So we're really excited about these next steps in our journey.
Well, we are too, in case you hadn't noticed, at Fifth Element, what you're doing. And I've always loved the term rugged elegance. It's a contradiction and it's a synergy at the same time, if you will. And and a day to breathe is something we all need, probably once a week almost, with everything moving so fast. So speaking of fast, the 4th industrial revolution has really been described as AI, technology, VR, things like that. But they say, and I've always wondered who they are, by the way, but they say that the 5th industrial revolution is really about humanity and how those come together, which is partly why we're named Fifth Element. So we focus on how impact and talent come together. We focus also on connecting the dots of people that do care. There's an expression that I know you know it. You'll never work a day in your life if you love what you do. And it'd be awesome if most people could really perform and do great if they loved what they do and they just didn't have to take a job. You've taken it to a more exciting level, the impact on individuals, their awareness, their leadership, their physical and mental well-being, harmony, etc. And the impact that I think then happens with also their families, their colleagues, and communities, because they bring it down. I always give the example of people coming home from work, and there's 2 things that can happen. They come home and their kids are there and they say, man, work sucked. I don't even like my boss. It was exhausting. Give me a beer. I'm going to sit on the sofa. Or they come home and say, I got to tell you what happened today with I met this person, that person. And that leads to sustainability alone, just from the kids hearing all that. And
of course, yes.
So with that said, can you talk about how you're taking it to an extra level of what you do and share a couple of stories and experiences?
Well, I'll set the bigger context, and then Jennifer, maybe you can talk about Mwangi and Kwame, specific example. But I think we've all heard of this genetic service called 23andMe that you can send your DNA in, and they'll analyze it for you. And Jen and I were talking in the early part of the year, and she said, "What if we called this year 23andMe, 23andWe?" I'm sorry. And I love that idea that it's a much bigger thing. And then as we started talking about it, I started talking about the big we. And the big we is not just all of humanity. The big we is all of everything, all of life, this planet that we live on. Nature, and I said, even for me, it was all the way down to bacteria and viruses, because as we've seen, and there's debate in the scientific community if a virus is actually a living thing or not. But it's certainly the COVID virus certainly upended life, as we know it for the last few years. So I think that we need to pay attention, and I think that one of the North Stars for us is, and this comes back to my childhood in many ways, but I think we've increasingly gotten disconnected from nature, and we're doing a lot of different things in a lot of different areas. But we want people to get into nature, to the extent, I think everybody has access to nature, even if it's just a tree, on an urban sidewalk. But just to be at wonder with nature. I mean, just the simplest example for me is that we're all breathing right now, and we're breathing in what the tree has exhaled out in terms of oxygen. And our exhalation is carbon dioxide, which the tree is breathing in. So just that very intimate cycle tells us that we're part of something much bigger, right? That's the 23andWe. So Jen, why don't you give a specific example?
Well, and before that, just to set the context of how we got there, my folks sat us down 1995 and let us know that their net worth was going to go to charity. And so while we're in the height of building biospace, and giving birth to our first children and raising children, we were inspired to become philanthropists, and created what was called Thrive Foundation for Youth. The mission was to create environments and opportunities for young people to thrive, enabling them to become all that God intends. And while our whole family are a family of Christian people, our investments were not necessarily all faith-based. But along that journey, there was a real desire to have our own story. That was our own, as my dad says, put your own skin in the game, which we did financially, having been the very first investors, very first investors in, as a family, in the Google of China, Baidu. That gave us the capability of both becoming philanthropists at a young age, as well as self-funding our Rugged, Elegant, Soulful network way back when. And when we had the great privilege of moving to Seacliff, we ended up transitioning our previous home into what became the Thrive House for Youth, where we served at-risk youth and their mentors for 8 years. But it was a system dynamics, a systems thinking summit, philanthropy summit, that pivoted my mind. It was a real epiphany moment for me as a philanthropist to say our greater leverage is in serving the mentors and the leaders of the world. And when that happened, my heart opened up to this house here in Seacliff becoming the Thrive House 2.0 to serve the mentors, the leaders of the world, the big kids like you and me. And that then opened my heart to say, okay, I'm looking for divine guidance as to specifically who. And the first direction was the word peace, but it was an acronym. I was walking out on Land's End, just our front yard here, and peace represented, P is for pioneers and philanthropists, aspiring and current parents, pastors and priests. E is for entrepreneurs and entertainers and environmentalists. I'm like, okay, I'm listening. This is fascinating. I mean, it was just literally a stream of consciousness of. A is for authors and activists and artists, athletes. C is for creatives. And there's a story regarding Robin Williams, regarding comedians, and social entrepreneurs, the second E. So we got on a journey in that regard of serving the peace creators. And then I was literally, praying for a very specific sign of why, how, what. And woke up at 4:30 in the morning, and I had my sign. This is an all glass solarium up here on our 4th floor, and the full moon was beaming, and right next to it was all caps in white, STOP, stop.
So just
and that
what was happening, just so
Yeah.
that the moonlight was hitting the street where I had painted stop, and that was reflecting back onto the glass solarium.
But all I saw was stop. And then I went to my I'm like, okay, discernment. I went to my app called Jesus Calling, and what was the first word on that day's devotion but STOP? And I'm like, okay, this is divine. I was very clear that this place needs to be a place for leaders to stop, and do this deep dive on their higher purpose. And so if there's anything that I would love for people to think about, whether it's the privilege of coming to a place like this, where it's a curated experience, or wherever you are in life, the notion of turning it off for a day, where you turn off your phone, you turn off your computer, and you go inward, you get out of your head, mind, and into your heart space, and in looking for divine guidance to your greater purpose. That is absolutely the first step. We've got to start with the 23 and me, in order for us to be better at the 23 and we. And by virtue of us doing that, we have now given birth here to 3 nonprofit organizations, and we've invested in 5 for-profit ventures. That this place has become an incubator and an accelerator for leaders to further thrive. And that was an unexpected, result. And one of those is the first host of our co-host of the Day to Breathe concept, Mwangi Mukami from Kenya, we got him excited about regenerative agriculture. We thought he would go home to Kenya to make that first investment. We said, whatever you find, we want to be the first to hear about it because we want to invest in you. He ended up going actually to Ghana. My folks had created through Stanford Business School a program called SEED, which stands for Stanford's Institute for Innovation in Developing Economies, helping entrepreneurs scale their businesses through a mentorship program. So I introduced Mwangi to Emmanuel Kitcher, the associate director in Accra, Ghana, with SEED. And he introduced him to Kwame Williams, who runs a company called True Moringa, doing regenerative agriculture in Ghana. And the work that they're doing, this is a gentleman who was born in Ghana. He also went to MIT, aerospace engineering degree, partnered with a white woman from Harvard, and they've created True Moringa, 23 products available through Amazon here in America, leveraging the health and well-being of the moringa tree for our own
superfood.
It's well, go for it.
Okay.
Yes, it's a really beautiful.
I wasn't familiar with the moringa tree, but it's a very resilient tree. It grows really well in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's super resilient. And it turns out that the leaves create the superfood that's even more nutritious than things like kale or spinach. And then it also produces pods that can be pressed into oil, which is really good for your skin and so forth. And I think Jennifer's, and I'm really avoiding the temptation to get into moringa in more detail, but I think Jennifer's telling the story about, connections, right? That she has these connections, this international bent as a result of her parents' work at Stanford. And we literally at this point have connections with people around the world.
In fact, the back end, we've made the decision at this stage of our life where we're not interested in building a company again of 100 employees. So we're doing it with social impact leaders. And we're not going to be the technologists that we were in that everything that we build is, custom code based, designed by us. We're going to find the best of breed in the marketplace, and through one of our social impact leaders that we served, climate champion Gagan Levy, who has really helped direct our strategy and our theory of change. He introduced us to a company called Portal, Portl. And is likely that the back end of the RE Soulful network will be based on vis-a-vis Portal. So we're very excited about bringing that to the market. In the same token, they've invested in the first animated film where the woman is the superhero, based off of a Pakistani pop star who brought a TV series to Pakistan and India that has a following of 200 million people. And, it's all about women empowerment and using, that art form. So they're just very diverse in terms of the investments that have come in. And that will be part of the blessing of building the RE Soulful network, to be able to help leaders get there further, faster, and then invest together in these kinds of ventures that are addressing climate change, or addressing gender equity, addressing racial equity, or addressing peace in the world, and addressing health and well-being. Those are our 5 areas.
Can you repeat all that?
I'm sure she could. She's really quite brilliant.
No, we have it recorded, so we're in good shape there. No, but there's so much I could comment on there. That's but for example, nature. I live near the ocean here in Hermosa Beach, and when everything was locked down, I was listening, and I remember telling somebody the birds are singing outside differently today. It sounds like they're singing opera, and the birds are something like, I don't know where they all are, but this is cool, And they were really going. And I remember we saw the videos of the goats and the this and that going into towns when everybody was in lockdown. Right. And it became like, wow, this is real. We are tied to them. We kicked them out of their place, basically.
You know, with our home being right across from this beautiful Land's End, this, nature hike with views of the Golden Gate Bridge and the Marin Headlands, we are dog people. We had a dog until we sadly lost her this past April, but that was our front yard. And every day, twice a day, we would walk Land's End. It wasn't until an investment we made in an incredible organization called Reimagine End of Life, where they have a festival talking about end of life. In San Francisco and then in New York, we hosted here at the retreat a 3.5-hour workshop called Free to Flourish. What do you have to let die in your life so that you're more free to flourish? And in that 3.5-hour workshop, we took a half an hour where we went out to nature. All those years walking our dog, we were soaking up nature, but I had never stopped to listen to what nature had to teach me. And now that is part of the practice of our everyday to breathe experience, curated experience. It's so powerful what we have to learn in the spirit of what Tim talked about, the 23 and we. It's we connecting with one another, other human beings. It's also us connecting with nature, listening to what the birds have to say to us. There's a dolphin down there. What is that dolphin speaking to us?
No, I totally get it. I totally get it. I love dogs too, by the way. When I go walking on the Strand and whatnot, I know more of the dogs' names than the people's names, actually.
That's true.
So sometimes it's very exciting, interesting conversations with them. And I even have a favorite tree that I pass by all the time. And
I love it.
It's so true what you're talking about, and it's a whole, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful, and if we miss it, it's tragic if we miss it, basically.
Well, and Tim, speak to the recharge room as well. One of the other investments that came about the retreat, which is a profound, and then our last just meeting with longevity, where we're taking a variation of what is called currently the recharge room.
Yeah, we got introduced through a friend to another friend, but she, I'll make a long story short, but during the kind of height of the pandemic, frontline healthcare workers were working, 18, sometimes 24-hour shifts and not having the chance to get out of the hospital even. And they were being traumatized by, 8 or 9 deaths in a single day. And what came out of that was something called the recharge room, which was an immersive experience into nature, which is basically like a 10 or 15-minute video of nature with the ambient sounds of nature scored to music specifically designed to put people into a state of what's called soft fascination. So it's kind of my description is if you're looking at a flame in a fireplace or a campfire, you get kind of mesmerized, and that turns out to be really good for your brain, especially to handle trauma. So for people who can't get into nature, it would be great in prisons. We just did a prison visit in Pelican Bay. It'd be great for incarcerated folks. But there's such power in nature to heal us. I mean, the Japanese have the forest bathing, but really, the ideal scenario is to, get out into real nature. And, that's been one of the real benefits of we have a recharge room, both here in San Francisco and in Maine. But more than anything, it gets us out into real nature to really appreciate, what we have right in front of us. So I don't, for your whole audience, I would say, get out in nature and take notice of what's happening.
So, and our model, as we strive to bring this to the world, is that corporations or even individuals who would like a recharge room can reduce their stress by 60% in 15 minutes. It's proven. But for every recharge room that is brought into the corporate world or someone's personal world, that person also is investing in a recharge room for someone in the marginalized communities of the world. That's our model. So we're excited about, bringing them into the prison system. We're excited about bringing them, for instance, we met with Patrick Dempsey who created the Dempsey Cancer Healing Center in Maine, and serving it's a free service for cancer patients and their families. And we're looking to bring a recharge room into that space. So
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant, and we've talked about it a little bit before, and I've always liked it because I've been involved in sports a lot. I remember when corporates were building little gardens. We also work with the Wellbeing International Wellbeing Institute, and what corporations are doing now that maybe just have a meditation room where they have grass, they have green plants around, just because that alone, if you look at it, makes you feel better.
Well,
And
it's so interesting you mentioned that, Mark. We got off, we flew from Boston to San Francisco yesterday, and we got off in Terminal 1, which we normally get off on. And as we were walking down the jetway, I looked out the window, and typically you have like the black tar and gravel roofs. And they had planted this, I don't know, 20 by 20 area of succulents on the roof. And just as you're getting off the plane to see that greenness really just like put me in a whole different frame of mind. So it seems like it's something that's really being embraced by a lot of folks.
you know, when I first noticed it, when I'm a big hockey fan, but what I really love is walking into a baseball stadium with real grass. And what happens is it brings you back to being a kid, first of all.
Sure, yes, yeah.
When I was a kid, not necessarily understanding about well-being per se back then, but I knew the feeling of where I was in the green grass and the feeling good and the blue sky above and whatnot. And it's, play ball type of thing, but it was beyond play ball. There was more to it. And so it's absolutely right on. And we definitely need to talk more about it. And by the way, this is another conversation that does impact peace also. I mean, peace, where people will get into less conflict because of that as well, and start, thinking what's important versus.
Well said.
So, a couple other things. We talked about diversity before, and you mentioned, and what was it, 23andMe. I always got a kick out of people who, I wouldn't call them racist, but they had racial characteristics in them, let's say. And then they would find out when they did one of those tests that they were related to somebody from Africa. And it's like, do they go take a shower? Do they pull it out of them? They're not feeling too good at that point. And it's fascinating to see the ones that change, which is fantastic if you change because of that. But it's kind of fun and fascinating to watch them in that respect. But just on diversity again, before I ask you a last question, and we definitely think we need a sequel because this is too interesting. I mentioned in Montreal, we were very into diversity and we were just taught that from the beginning because how important and brilliant and everything it did for us. I had a Pee Wee hockey team that the media found out about, and that's 12-13s. That was, I mean, all religions, black, green, blue, Greek, I mean, you name it. And the kids taught us and the parents so much about how to work together and not how to judge in advance and things like that. From a kid's mouth to God's ears, or whatever that expression is. Can you just share briefly, your journey in the diverse world and what that means really for everything, for our fulfillment, for our nourishment, for peace, for everything?
Well, I just have to, before doing that, just share with you what you mentioned about 23andMe, and I feel so aligned with that. In that, 2007 was our first trip to Africa, and I came back and I said that was life transforming. That notion of when you support a nonprofit organization, you get inspired and then you serve them 1 or 2 years. But if you physically go to that land, you end up being dedicated to that organization for life. So we're, as part of the Rugged, Elegant, Soulful Network, striving to inspire people to go in and experience, like we just did in Pelican Bay Prison. That now has been life transforming the best way. But we built an Africa-inspired home called Asante Sana. Asante Sana is Swahili for thank you very much, in Kennebunkport, Maine, our Rugged Elegance retreat in the East Coast, in great part because my soul is in Africa. And to your point, I had to look it up. I've got to have African. There's got to be some form of me. And then there it is. I've got this, little bit of Angolan from Angola. So
that's totally fantastic.
Right? Yeah. And so we've now had 3 trips. Our daughter doesn't know this now yet, but this Sunday she's going to find out. She's graduating from Stanford Business School, and her graduation gift is going to be a family trip around the somewhere in the world she picks. Our son is graduating from NYU. He's already narrowed it down to Japan and South Korea, or India and Pakistan, to be determined. But I think I hope Jesse's going to choose Africa. It'll be our 4th trip. And what we do when we go is we incorporate much of the philanthropy that we're doing. There are at least a dozen organizations that we are supporting, like Roots Africa, bringing regenerative agriculture to Uganda and Liberia. She can bring scholarships to women from different places like Rwanda and Liberia in Africa. So yeah, but speak to the diversity, because it's such a significant part of our journey.
Right. So it turns out I grew up in Marathon County, Wisconsin, which I didn't know until well after I left, that it was the most homogeneous county in the country for a long time.
Wow.
And but my late mother grew up in a suburb of Chicago called Cicero, and I think she brought a knowledge of what we would call racial and gender diversity that I wasn't aware of, obviously, growing up as a kid, and probably my dad, who grew up on the same farm that I grew up with, might not have known of as well. But I mean, just little things like, not little things, but I mean, ultimately big things. But for instance, one of my uncles, I didn't have the word for it at that time, but he was gay, and he brought his partner with him, and we weren't allowed to use the word weird because that was kind of nomenclature for gay, and I didn't know that. But we weren't. Anytime everybody said weird, that we were punished in some way. And then also one of my older brothers was a really good basketball player, and he played at a college that was nearby, and he'd bring his black teammates to dinner, and my mom embraced them and my dad embraced them. So I mean, there were even at a young age, I was really taught to value diversity, and so that's just grown over time, especially after meeting this woman. So
she's pretty diverse. Yeah, you're right. So no, even and I don't want to do even a whole special thing on this. Even the overflow of a lot of the people you work with, like veterans and marginalized, and then into the prisons, the currently incarcerated and the previously incarcerated, the diversity there is into a lot of women, a lot of veterans, a lot of everybody, right?
Yeah. Well, and to be honest, here we had an LGBTQ rock star leader that we offered a day to breathe to before Christmas, and he said, "This is such a profound, transformative experience for me, Jen. I really want to do something special as a thank you." And then he says, "Can I invite you to prison?" And I said, "Okay, wow, that's an offer." And at the time, there was this feeling of, wow, we have our hands full around the realm of serving the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color leaders, the LGBTQ plus leaders, veteran leaders, and women. I mean, we got a huge population to serve here. And I really, why am I now being invited in to this other form of population? And it took even before we stepped foot in the prison, a walk at 6 o'clock in the morning with a gentleman by the name of Seraphine, followed by another walk and talk with a gentleman, Dominique, who were what are called lifers. You get a moment to connect with their story. They're living in solitary confinement for 20 plus years. The deep dive that these men have done on themselves, wow. The profound change that has occurred, the recognizing of how one can heal and one can then step back into the mainstream of life and be incredible beyond measure impact leaders in this world. I now get why they are absolutely supposed to be a part of the experience, that we are all going to benefit
No doubt.
by, their transformation and hearing their stories, and then leaning into support, that 10xing their impact, going back in and now serving the at-risk youth that they were, and trying to transform them, that we're going to address poverty in our nation in a profound way. And this, the ripple effect is beautiful.
No, it's spectacular. And I've worked with prisons up in Winnipeg, Canada as well. And the minute you sent out that little email or whatnot, I sent an email back to you right away saying, this is right on the money, and some of the stuff we talked about. And I just interviewed a guy, his name is Troy Alexander. He's got his own skincare company. He puts his prison number on all his products and stuff like that. And there's so much benefit to be had, and it impacts economically, socially, every way possible. So I'm excited to be engaged with you on that type of stuff too. And last question here, although I've said that before in many interviews, but last question here. With everything that's gone on in the last few years, and I remember a client telling me in 2021, he said, Mark, the year 2020 was the year that flew by slowly. And I thought about that, and it was actually kind of interesting, because the last 3 years have been really weird, to use that word you weren't allowed to use before. That said, can you share with us what you're both most grateful for and what you're most hopeful for?
Wow.
Well, two things. One, I think most grateful for was that we had, we'd lived here in San Francisco for 30 years, and we decided that, we always wanted to spend a whole year in Maine, and we decided in summer of 2019 that we were going to be there for a year, and in part because both of our adult children at the time were living in New York City. And little did we know that the pandemic was coming, but the long story short was that we had an opportunity to spend months of time with our adult children that we never would have, without the pandemic.
Right.
And then also, as Jennifer mentioned, that the pandemic forced us to rethink what we were doing with our home here in San Francisco, that we couldn't serve groups of people because of the pandemic, but we could serve one leader at a time. And so we did what we could, and that's what we focused on, and it turned to be a huge silver lining, and it's really directed our work. So what would you add to that, Jen?
Yeah, you had a day to breathe to figure that out.
Yeah, there you go. Yes, yeah, right, exactly. That, I mean, I think that you make a good point, because we, I think I tend toward being an introvert, and so having all this time, not being able to interact with other people, and some ways it became some of the intellectual bedrock of what we're doing now, because I had long periods of time to think and write and conceptualize, what's coming next. So that was another blessing.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for this man seated next to me. I am an extrovert. I'm a rebel with a cause. And I'm so grateful that this man has celebrated my strengths. That was not the case with the venture capitalists. When we raised $30 million, I lost my voice. This man has been tried and true, behind me, supporting me every step of the way as we craft this next venture together. I'm very grateful for our children. What an extraordinary privilege it is to be a mother, to be parents, and to see these children become the most extraordinary individuals on the planet. What a privilege. I'm grateful for my faith and the ability to think about creating environments and opportunities for us big kids to thrive, enabling us to become all that our divine creator has intended for us. We're on a journey, having moved to Maine, sharing our home here, the irony of creating an impact network via this home, far greater than when we physically were living here. But it was done one leader at a time, one leader at a time. So grateful.
And what are you most hopeful for, both of you?
I'm hopeful that we're at a point in human history that I think in many ways, it seems very dire, especially, as far as climate is concerned. But I'm an optimist, and I do think that people will come together. And I don't think we should think that there's any technical solution to climate change. It's going to require each of us to change our behaviors in ways, and I think it really comes down to and I'm a capitalist for sure, but I think that I think in some ways we have to start doing things that are more inconvenient for us, because that is the way that we express our love, not only for the ecosystems that support us, but also for future generations.
Right.
And I think if we can start moving, and it really gets back to the idea of moving from 23andMe to 23andWe, that we need to think, not so much about what's convenient for me, but what's convenient for we, right? And so, I mean, things like, for me, it's like little things like composting and do my best to avoid, and we're eating, like one plant-based meal a week, little things, but all those little things multiplied by billions and billions really add up to like the kind of change that we need to see.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
I think about, being an entrepreneur and a philanthropist, an investor in the world. And, if you look at specifically these 5 sustainable development goals that we're focused on, if it's just the two of us, it is very daunting. But the notion that together we can get there, we can go further, we can go more profoundly. When I think about racial equity, this is the time here and now where we're going to move the needle. Around gender equity, we're going to move the needle together. Around health and well-being in our world, together we are going to get there. That we have the technology, we have the mindset, and we have the heart, and that is going to move us towards moving from that rather than climate change is happening to us, it is happening for us. And the lessons that we can learn by taking that mindset, we're going to resolve the issues of climate, and then ultimately peace in our nation, peace in this world. I believe that we have the capacity to be creating the heaven on earth here and now, that it's not when we die that is the end all be all, that here on earth we as a community, we as a nation, we as a world can begin to make this world a better place for us all forever.
Yeah, I agree, and I just to say it, I'm definitely grateful that you guys are leaders who care, and that you're creating, hopefully even with us, more leaders who care, because if that's the mindset, then like you said, Tim, you're doing it and a billion other people doing it, it does make a difference. And I'm hopeful for all the exciting things that we're going to impact, in the future. So thank you so much for being on the series, and for just being leaders who care. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
thank you for
so
leading
Mark.
this charge. We're so grateful.
Thanks.